Hi, everyone, and welcome to our live webinar today for Practically Perfect PA and the EA Campus. I'm Nicky Christmas, and we are going to be talking about effective meetings in a hybrid working environment today. So welcome, everybody. It's great to see all of you, and you really are all over the world. So, wow, Argentina, New York, Canada, the UK, amazing New Zealand. Thank you all so much for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure. Hi, Eva in Madrid. I'm in Barcelona, Spain. So thank you for joining us. We've got about 45 minutes to get through a presentation on working in a hybrid working environment and arranging meetings while many of you are working in a hybrid environment, and of course to take any of your questions. So we've got about 45 minutes, so I better crack on. But thank you so much for joining us. I know how busy you all are, so it's always a real thrill to me to know that you're joining me today. So most of you will have organised meetings with a mixture of people joining the meeting in person and others joining virtually. I know as assistants, you'll know without a solid setup, planning and facilitation, it can be tricky to ensure that the meeting is a success and that all of the attendees, either physically there or on screen, are engaged and are fully involved. So I want to get a sense of where you are with arranging meetings in this kind of hybrid environment. And while I'm loading up my slides, I want you to let me know on the chat if you have managed hybrid meetings and some of the challenges that you might have experienced in this kind of new world of some people being in the meeting room with you, some people being in a meeting room and you're at home organizing the meeting, or some people being in the meeting room and others tuning in remotely. So let me know if it's something that you are managing and any challenges that you might have. And while I'm waiting for those responses to come in, I'm going to load up my slides, which doesn't prove to be too tricky because, as many of you will know, with hybrid meetings and events, the technology is very effective at the moment. So, as I said, let me know some of the challenges that you have and if you are managing events remotely. Yep. So thank you, Arza. Hybrid, in person and virtual. I think this is going to be the case for a lot of you, that you are now pretty aware of how to set these meetings up. So, as I said, what we're going to cover today is how to run effective meetings in a hybrid working environment. So, as I said, it looks like the majority of you run and manage a hybrid meeting where people, I said, are there either physically and dialing in remotely. And you, as the organizer, you can either be there in person as well, or you can be part of the group of people that are dialing in remotely. And obviously, since the pandemic, this has very much become the norm. I've got a little statistic here for you. McKinsey said this was back in 2021. So for many of us, kind of midway through the pandemic, that 9 out of 10 organizations would embrace a hybrid model. So this is great for flexibility, employee happiness, and keeping people safe and comfortable. We all, during the pandemic, found a way to work, but it doesn't mean that all employees have felt engaged and included in these meetings. So I can see some of you have said, some of the challenges. Etiquette absolutely is one of them. People leaving their comment in the chat on Zoom rather than waiting for their turn to speak, which means as somebody particularly yet taking minutes or trying to keep up with notes, harder to pick out and save what's been asked, some of the questions or some of the chat that's taken place. Last minute no shows for physical attendees makes catering a challenge. Yep, absolutely. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the challenges that I came up with. Here are my top 3. Attendees feel equal. So in a hybrid meeting, it can be challenging to ensure that remote and in-person attendees feel equally valued. Without the proper setup, remote participants may feel like outsiders or observers, or like their contribution is less significant. For those who aren't physically in the meeting, interrupting the flow of conversation can be hard when you're not in the room. And often virtual attendees' opinions are often forgotten, or they're not even asked. So attendees feeling equal. Technology is functional. So we've all sat in those meetings where the virtual meeting technology isn't working correctly, or there are internet issues, or people are muting themselves or not unmuting themselves. We've all been there. So they're not unique to hybrid meetings, but they can be especially detrimental when you have a mixture of in-person and remote attendees. This ties in with the challenge of creating kind of like an even playing field. So if the technology that you're using is suboptimal, remote participants may have difficulty keeping up with what's happening. And likewise, if remote attendees dial in with a weak internet connection or the video quality is not very good, then in-person participants find it really tricky to engage with those that aren't in the room and actually enjoy what's being said or understand if there's a presentation that's going on. And as I said, they forget to turn on their camera, or they don't want to turn it on, or they are muting and unmuting themselves, then all in all, it just kind of leads to a disjointed environment. So lastly, attendees are engaged. So the most engaging meetings and workshops are interactive, and they keep attendees engaged in the conversation. And this becomes incredibly complex when you have some people in the room who are able to physically take part and engage with other people in the room, and others relying purely on technology. So it's essential that discussions and any activities involved for the virtual attendees can't wholly be disengaged from the meeting. So, for example, if there is brainstorming activities, then that can't just be happening in the physical room where people are writing on whiteboards. That you also need to engage with the online attendees as well. So it's keeping people engaged. So I think, as many of you have said there, we know what the challenges are. And let's just kind of briefly talk about meetings in general. Only half of the time spent in meetings is effective, and evidence shows that virtual meetings are actually less effective. So if we want to ensure our meetings are helpful and they add value, we as assistants who are organising the meetings need to be strategic about organising meetings. So they have to be effective, whether they're hybrid or not, to move the organisation's strategy and strategic objectives forward. So I want to look at how we run effective meetings in a hybrid working environment. And I'll come on to this in a little bit, but we are going to talk about the effective meetings management online course that we have. But on that course, we talk a lot about the difference between efficient meetings and effective meetings. And I just want to take a quick minute to look at the differences for you. So for me, an efficient meeting starts promptly, it stays on track, it includes a few people, actually as fewer people as possible, and it achieves the objective of the meeting. So that sounds like job done, right? That's what an efficient meeting is. But we haven't said whether the right people were in the meeting, whether the meeting generated any value, and whether the actions were communicated outside of the meeting. So I want to talk a little bit about what makes an effective meeting, and as I said, whether it's virtual or not. I'm just going to move on to the slides. So let me know again in the chat if this resonates with you, because I think there is a difference between efficient meetings, and that for many of us we can be guilty of thinking that's, as I said, job done. It started on time. The agendas, actually there might not even be an agenda, but it started on time. The people have been invited. It's happened. But what does an effective meeting look like? So here are my examples of what an effective meeting looks like. The meeting has a clear purpose. The meeting provides a space for open discussion. There's a tangible outcome from the meeting, and the result is then shared with others whose work may be affected. So, as I said, let us know in the chat your thoughts about this. and what you think makes an effective meeting. So for me, I really like that last one because that's one that often gets forgotten. You're in the meeting, you're taking notes, everybody's engaged in the conversation, whether they're dialing in remotely or not. Actions are created, notes are taken. But actually, a lot of the actions and the discussions that were taking place in the meeting affect people who aren't in the meeting. That could be an action for somebody who is a direct report to, say, your executive or a direct reports report. And they haven't been informed that they need to know something about what happened in the meeting. So for me, that's a really useful piece of advice when you are running meetings, that you think about those people that are affected who are outside of the meeting. So, yep, great point. Thank you. Yeah, recording the meeting obviously helps. And again, you can just send the meeting recording to those who are outside of the meeting. So that's very helpful. So let's get back to hybrid meetings. Now, we know hybrid meetings have specific requirements that will make them effective. So let's look at how to overcome the challenges that we discussed earlier. So for me, the digital setup is the first place to start. For many assistants, we don't really actually often have a say over the digital setup in your offices. Again, let us know if you've made that choice, because I'd love to hear from you if you do have a say in the digital setup. But many of us don't. It's the IT department that have set that up. So it's difficult to be able to have much of a say over what technology is used, but you can do a few things to ensure that the meeting runs effectively and you don't have any tech issues. So let's have a quick look at some of my suggestions. So the first one is pretty obvious. Hybrid meetings are difficult to hear and difficult to see. Remote employees, if they're on a small screen, that's really tricky. And the in-person employees are kind of scattered in the boardroom, making it difficult for the remote attendees to be able to see and hear the in-person attendees. So it's challenging to stay engaged and follow what you're saying when there isn't enough space, either physically or remotely, for everybody that's participating in the meeting. So again, this is a fairly obvious one, but it's worth saying. Use a conference room with the largest screen available to you. I want to give you an example. So Google have created these meeting spaces where each remote employee is visible on their own screen, and each in-person employee are kind of sat in a circular space, so that the setup is that everybody is in the same camera. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. Much easier than me explaining it to you. But there we go. Every remote attendee has their own screen. And as you can see, there's a circular setting for the physical attendees so that they're in one screen, which makes it much easier to collaborate and see each other. If you have a similar setup to this, then let us know, because I think this is a really effective way, if you've got that technology, to be able to then really give each attendee their own amount of space to be able to participate. So as I said, I think this is a great setup. I think it really fosters inclusion and should really make an effective meeting. What's Miriam said there. So fortunate enough to have an AV team who take care of all of our audio and video equipment, always coordinates a test. I'll come on to that. Always coordinates a test run prior to the meeting. Okay. So here are a few other ideas for setting up a digital hybrid meeting. Another struggle with hybrid meetings is non-verbal cues from attendees. So it's hard to read non-verbal cues signaling someone wants to speak when there's a mix of in-person and remote employees. So I would say always make sure that you enable the chat function, so everyone who is participating has equal visibility regardless of whether they're in the meeting or they're tuning in remotely. Make the video platform link clear to attendees. So this is an obvious one, but make sure that link goes out well in advance. So, and it's as you have it in as many places as possible on the calendar invitation on the agenda so that people know exactly where they're going, and you haven't got to then chase them and find out where they are. And then test, as Miriam said, test the technology in advance. So nothing is worse than malfunctioning technology. Technology needs to work well during hybrid meetings, so remote attendees can clearly hear and see everything that's going on in the office. If they can't, this is going to make them feel excluded and ultimately unimportant. So it's also important that remote employees have good technology so that in-person employees can hear and see them. As Miriam said, remember to do an audio, camera, and internet check before the meeting begins, so the time allotted to the actual meeting isn't wasted trying to solve any technical issues. And on top of that, I would also say offer the opportunity for the remote attendees to test their setup beforehand. So if you say to them, I'll be in the room 5 minutes before you dial in, or you're supposed to dial in 5 minutes beforehand, and we'll just test everything and make sure that it's okay for you. So have that option for them as well. If you have several video technologies available, so Zoom, Google Meet, or Microsoft Teams, if you use a plethora of software, as I said, make it really clear that which platform you're using so that people don't end up on Google Meet when they should be on Zoom, for example. And then, as I said, think about the technology needed for other things that take place in the meeting. So if you're brainstorming, for example, how is that going to be done? Are you going to do that physically in the room and have somebody monitoring the chat so that somebody can facilitate what the remote attendees want to add to the brainstorming? Or will you use something like a virtual whiteboarding tool? If your workshop requires additional materials, how will these be available to both remote and in-person participants? So, for example, you might, if it's board papers, then you might create a PDF that can either be printed out or accessed via the computer. So just be aware of the additional materials that you might have in the meeting and how you're going to get those to the remote attendees. So I want to look at the actual physical space and how you go about setting that up. So it can be easy to forget about remote attendees in hybrid meetings because people get carried away with face-to-face conversations. However, focusing on some attendees more than others isn't effective. Therefore, it's essential to give equal focus to all virtual and in-person attendees. So, as I said, you want to make sure that there is stable internet connection, good quality video, good quality audio. If you've got one, the group of people sharing one video and microphone, again, just ensure that everybody can be seen and heard. So depending on the size and the space, it's probably going to be worth, and I'm sure most of you have got this, having a portable conference call speaker or having a few of them dotted around. Because as many of us have seen over the years, if you've just got that one central one in the middle of the table, depending on where people are sitting, they can't be heard. So just ensure that the microphones are conveniently placed so that everybody can be heard, because actually quite often it's being heard that's more important than being seen. If your budget allows it, then it's obviously worth upgrading to include extra screens, any Wi-Fi boosters or a better internet connection. There's also the option of having some really funky technology where you can get AI webcams which can track and zoom zoom into whoever is speaking. So if you have any of that equipment available to you, make sure that you use it and take real advantage of it, because it really does help enable a much more effective meeting. But I said most importantly, the internet connection, good quality video and clear audio is the most important thing to have. So again, I'd really like to know about your setups. So let us know again in the chat how you set up your AV and if you have any funky technology that you could tell us about. So Dawn said they're currently setting up a new layout for our meeting room, including a Surface Hub. That's brilliant. Dawn, let us know what a Surface Hub is. I'd be really interested. Switch on the caption option so everyone can follow. Esther, that's a great idea. Yeah, ensure any pre-work beforehand is organised. Yeah, mail everybody any reading material, absolutely. Natalie's asked, can anyone recommend a specific portable conference call speaker? Natalie, that's a great question. I think we'll come back to that one. I think we might have a bit of advice from other people. If not, we can have a look to see if there are any suggestions. Yeah. Or bring in their own devices, absolutely. Okay, so let's move on. Oh, sorry, I've missed this slide here. Yep. So just to confirm, stable internet connection, good quality video and clear audio, well-placed cameras, think through the technology needed for any brainstorming sessions. Okay. So I want to look at what the agenda would look like, because it will be slightly different between a in-person meeting, a fully remote meeting, and what we're terming a hybrid meeting. So firstly, it goes without saying that you should have an agenda for every meeting you organise, or that your executive attends. For hybrid meetings, you need to think of a few specifics, including how will remote attendees take part? How will in-person attendees take part? Where and how the outcomes or deliverables will be collated and presented. So set some time in the agenda to include a welcome to all of the attendees, especially those joining virtually. Said you want to make everyone feel welcomed, and you can take it one step further and ask your chairperson to encourage interaction with the virtual attendees by going to those colleagues first when asking for feedback or soliciting information. So yeah, remember to engage with the chairperson or whoever is chairing the meeting to make sure that they know to engage fully with the virtual attendees. When presenting, attendees should be brief and get straight to the point. I mean, generally they should be, but particularly in hybrid meetings. After each sort of bulk of information, make sure there is a short pause to allow anyone on site, but primarily off site, to jump in should they wish to make any additional comments or any feedback. So remember, when there's a presentation taking place, as you guys will know listening to me today, because this is virtual, it takes a little bit more time for it all to sink in. So if you're in a meeting and you're listening to somebody presenting, it really helps if there's a pause or there's a break, just to allow for that information to fully come across the airwaves so that you've got it and then you're able to formulate any questions. So it's well worth having those pauses. Before I finish up and take any questions, I want to add a few additional points. So firstly, it's well worth considering time zones and actually paying attention to time zones. Remember that remote employees may be in a different time zone. So when planning a hybrid meeting, that's really important to get the time zones right. If someone's scheduled a 10 a.m. meeting in London, it's going to be 5 a.m. in New York, which will obviously be outside working hours. So be mindful of where the meeting virtual attendees are to ensure the hybrid meeting accommodates everyone. I love this point, and I'm going to really reiterate that. Don't have a meeting after the meeting. Hands up if you know exactly what I'm talking about. Everyone's experienced a meeting after a meeting. When attendees talk about the meeting after it's happened as like a debrief outside of the meeting room where they'll kind of huddle about and chat. There's nothing wrong with doing that when it's fully in person, but when it's a hybrid meeting, having further discussions about the meeting once it's happened excludes all of the virtual attendees because they're not able to participate. So ensure that meeting attendees avoid that meeting after the meeting. And actually, one way of preventing that as an assistant is to be really hot on getting out those minutes and notes immediately after the session's finished, so that any comments or questions can be asked to the group via email or any of the messaging platforms that you have. So any of those meeting after the meetings, make sure they take place virtually. The next point I would like to make is be sensitive to subtle cues. So in case your remote colleagues have their cameras turned on, as an assistant, this is so helpful. Just keep an eye on those kind of subtle facial cues, such as them inhaling, that, or kind of any quizzical facial expressions they might have. And again, this is a really great way to help your executive ensure that the meeting's effective, because you can just pass them, a note or give them a look or have some kind of body language between the two of you where your executive is able to kind of sense that maybe the online participants aren't feeling engaged or feeling left out, or they're not quite sure about what's going on. So just look for those subtle cues. So I'm going to quickly jump in on the chat. That was really a whistle-stop tour on how you can make hybrid meetings more effective. Let's have a look at the chat and some of the things that you've said. So fantastic. Dawn, thank you. I'm going to pop this on. A Surface Hub is a Microsoft interactive whiteboard allowing you to meet via Teams, co-create and collaborate. Attendees can exclusively engage with everyone's voice and ideas. I like that a lot. That sounds fantastic. That's a great piece of kit. Sharon said, you'll love the owl. Advice to remote participants is to pin the owl picture. The panoramic view of the room as big as possible really helps. That's fantastic advice. So I think this is a Jabra. Is that the conferencing equipment? Brilliant. Thank you, Catherine, for the recommendation. What else have we got here? We always go around the room at the end of the meeting and ask each attendee if they have anything they would like to discuss. This has helped catch things up before we're done. Brilliant. I love that. So and Catherine said keeping an eye on the chat as well. Okay. So before we head into our Q&A, which is my favorite bit of my live webinars, I want to take just a quick minute to talk about the Effective Meetings Management online course. I'm going to show you a quick promo video first, and then I will just show you a few more details. So the Effective Meetings Management online course ensures that assistants who plan and organise meetings across global organisations have the tools that they need to execute effective meetings with purpose, objectives, and a clear outcome. We really, really want you guys to create effective meetings that really do add value, because I think, assistants organise so many meetings, and it's a place that we can add a huge amount of value in our organizations if they are run effectively, if the actions are recorded, if people are actually doing, the work that comes out of meetings, and everybody understands what is required of them in the meeting and once the meeting's finished. So I'm really excited to launch this new course. And because you lovely guys, have joined us today for the webinar, we have a 20% discount code for you. So the course consists of 6 modules. It costs £150, €180, or $190. And with our 20% discount, that's a little bit cheaper for you all today. If you have any more questions about the course, then please let me know. But otherwise, if you have any questions about meetings, about adding value as an assistant, really about anything to do with being an assistant, then I'm all ears. So please do let me know. Hit me up with your questions or any comments. I'm happy to chat, and we have 15 minutes to really have a great discussion. So again, any meeting questions you have, let me know. But Eva, lovely. Thank you so much for that comment. I did the course. It's really great. Let's see now if we can implement it in our meetings. Yeah, that's that's the next bit, isn't it? That's getting people to change is never easy. That's a great question. Thank you so much for asking us. Let me bring that up for you. Is it advisable for an assistant to organise and attend a meeting remotely? Yes, I think so. I think in today's day and age, it's doable. If you are part of the remote team, then everything that we've said really obviously works for you as well. I probably would say if you're having a hybrid meeting where there are going to be people in the room and you are attending from outside, I would probably ask a colleague, an assistant, or somebody potentially who's going to be in the meeting, or maybe your IT department, just to go in and make sure that the setup is working, that the attendees are going to be comfortable, that the IT equipment works properly. Because it is often the case, if you're remote and something goes wrong, people are still going to look to you to figure that out. So I would say it's doable, but make sure there's somebody there on hand physically who can help, or if there are any problems. I would say ideally it's better to be in the room, because how many of you have been in a meeting when something goes wrong? Everyone will turn to you, whether or not you're there to take the notes, or you're there to contribute, or you're there, you didn't even set up the meeting. 9 times out of 10 people will look to you for the answers. So yes, it's doable, but have somebody there as backup. Thank you so much for the question. Let's see what else we got. Miriam, I always attend our meetings in the event there are any requests and ensure everything runs smoothly, but you should always check. I agree. Catherine's asked, have you had any issues setting house rules etiquette for joining meetings but not following through or advising accordingly? So in terms of people not following the rules that you have, sorry, Catherine, if you could just let us know, is that right? You having set house rules and people not following through on the house rules. If that's the question, then yes, absolutely. It's really hard to change people and the way people act. I think it has to kind of come from the top down. You really need your executive on board if you're setting house rules or there's etiquette, then yes, you need it to come from the top down, and they need to be setting an example. And I think it's much easier to kind of tell your executive that if the house rules are being broken quite often, then you need them to be a role model. House rules are so important in meetings. It's actually on the course as well, and we have a blog post on it on Practically Perfect PA around some of the house rules that you should have in meetings. And some of them, are so simple, and yet they're not followed up on, like turn up on time, give an apology if you're not coming, those kind of things. There's really just people being polite and appreciative of each other's time. So if Catherine, if that was the question, then yeah, absolutely. It's hard to change people's behavior, but it has to come from the top down, and it has to be a meetings culture effectively. Natalie's asked, have you used an admin portal for documents? So when I worked as an assistant, and I'm about to show my age, board papers were the absolute bane of my life. I used to work as an account manager in one role, which was effectively an assistant to a whole load of boards. And I looked after 12 committees at one point. So I was organising 12 committee meetings, and they had 4 a year. So you were effectively having one every 2 weeks. and every board meeting came with a huge pack of board papers, and it was all paper and it was all confidential. So you had to print everything off, send everything to all of the committee members in a big board pack. They had to be laminated. Anybody else remembering these days? So as soon as the technology was available to have an online board paper portal, I recommended it to every assistant that I could, kind of grab, go, please get all of this stuff online. It's, yes, absolutely. I would 100% recommend you use technology for board papers. There are a few on the market. There are a few I know that people will be able to recommend that they use. And I would 100% recommend it because it is so time consuming, so incredibly time consuming. So yes, 100% use an admin portal. I couldn't say it enough. Sharon's asked, any specific tips for a chair that needs to chair remotely rather than with the in-person group? Sharon, that's a fantastic question. I think again, it's that thing, isn't it, with hybrid meetings? You are going to have chair people that will not be able to attend in person, and it's interesting in my experience that quite often then flips who feels slightly left out, because the chairperson, just with human nature, will tend to favor those who are online rather than the in-person participants. So it's again having a similar conversation to the chairperson who would be in the meeting physically as you would to as we were discussing earlier. So if the chairperson is remote, they need to remember to include the in-person group. They need to ensure that there are pauses so that they have all of the information. And I would again switch it so that the chairperson is favouring the in-person attendees, maybe more so than the remote attendees. You need to ensure more than anything else that their IT equipment is up to standard, that they have all of the papers that they need. They know who is remote and who is in person. I'd also recommend that they do a test beforehand to make sure everything's working appropriately for them. And I would work closely with them as well to ensure that they have captured everything that's happened in the meeting. So I'd recommend a debrief with the remote chairperson afterwards to make sure that they got everything, because it's hard to chair remotely. So I'd 100% recommend that you have a debrief with them post meeting to make sure that they've got everything. And again, those are the meetings where it would probably be really useful if you are the person that's in the room. So you're able to capture anything that's happened in the room, and you're able to kind of communicate that with them while they're working remotely. So yeah, just if you go back over this presentation, I'd flip what I said for any remote chair people. I hope that helps. Let's see. So we've got some recommendations for board papers, board books. That's a well-known one. Brilliant. Yep, there's always people who don't like to follow the rules. Absolutely. So let's have a look. Do people set those rules at the start of each meeting? I would set them way in advance of the meeting. I'd set them, as I said, there should be a meetings culture in your organization. And if you haven't got that, then that's a brilliant piece of work to do and implement, because there needs to be a consensus across the board that meetings are effective, and how you go about making all meetings effective. That would be a really useful piece of work that an assistant could do. And as I said, it's a meetings culture that needs to be established. Brilliant, that response. Oh, that's amazing. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yes. So yes, absolutely. Please use technology for board papers. If there are any questions, then please let us know. I'm happy to answer. If you want to ask a question that's outside of meetings, then Diligent, absolutely. Diligent is the one that I know the most for board papers. Convene is another great one. Yes, so if you do have any more questions, please let me know. Julietta has said there on Zoom, I make the chair of the meeting a co-host so they can also see the hands going up. That's a brilliant piece of advice. Thank you for sharing that with us. Let's see what else we've got. Okay, we've got about, oh, let's have a look. We've got about 5 more minutes. So if anybody does have any more questions, then please do let us know. If not, then we will ensure that you get a copy of the slides. They will be available for you from tomorrow. If you have any questions for me offline, I'm Nicky at practicallyperfectpa.com. You can always get in touch with me. I'm across all social media. So if you want to drop me a line on social media, please do so. Again, the Effective Meetings Management online course is available to you. The course code that we have for you is webinar20. That gives you 20% off the fee. If you have any questions about the course, then please let me know. If we don't have any more questions for me, then go and enjoy the rest of your day. If you do have any meetings, I hope that you're able to go in and make them much more effective. And I will see you shortly on a new and live webinar. Until then, have a wonderful day. Take care.